Hi, and welcome back to part 2 of The Belonging Place. In the last section, we did an introductory course into the historical wonders and blunders, the fears and phobias. Now we're going into the historical wonders and blunders. In this section, we are going to be addressing the scars and wounds that often come for those who have a disability and for those of you who may not have one. When we last left off, we were discussing a little bit of the ancient Near East. Well, in the ancient Near East, there was early evidence in Egypt by archaeologists picked up on hieroglyphics of people treating those who had epilepsy, mental illness, and those with a physical deformity. Many disabilities were considered contagious. Example is the leper colony. There was a great fear of hidden disabilities like mental illnesses thought to spread among people, especially families. Besides washing sores, there were herbal remedies. Some had odd treatments to fix a number of mental and physical abnormalities. A number of these remedies were based on superstitions. How many of you have heard the phrase, "All the lunatics come out when there is a full moon"? If you have, do you know why we say that? According to the ancient times, in Greece and Rome, and in many other cultures at the time, it was believed that the full moon at its different phases affected different types of disabilities, including those who had a mental illness and people who had epilepsy, for instance. During this time, the full moon would let people with disabilities come out and get their necessities. One of the most famous myths about the full moon, or lunacy, is about Diana and Orion. Diana is best known as the goddess of chastity, but did you know she was also assigned the moon? There was also a character by the name of Luna, but she's more in the South American culture. In this story, it runs as follows. Diana was out one day with her ladies-in-waiting to go bathing. She was spotted by a young hunter by the name of Orion. Orion accidentally saw her bathing naked, and, well, she found out. So she struck him with a form of epilepsy as we know it today, but in those days it was considered moonstruck. And so he went out hunting, and his dogs went berserk. And his dogs, well, they killed him. After he was killed, the gods, like Zeus, Hera, and the entire council on Olympus decided, well, it was an accident, and decided to make him a constellation. You may know the constellation of Orion if you are a fan of gazing at the stars and you like doing that sort of thing. Well, that's where it comes from, the story of Orion and Diana. So a lot of people thought that mental illness and being moonstruck came from this sort of a story, that people with mental illnesses and disabilities like epilepsy would be affected by the full moon. There is an interesting study on how the full moon affects the brain. You can find the study on Johns Hopkins University's website. All you have to do is just type in the word full moon and you can read the entire study. It's very fascinating. There's a few treatments still in use today from these times, such as frankincense, myrrh, lavender, and cannabis oil. Anyone who had a physical or mental handicap was considered inferior, a curse from the gods or goddesses, or by God. Treatments sought by local shamans, talismans, and or temples by the gods or goddesses often to milk a person out of their money. There was a god that you had to go see, and then you paid them your share, a sacrifice of sorts, and then they would go and say, "Oh, you are cured." And if you were cured, usually in like a dream sequence, and then you would be fixed. We know today that wasn't exactly the most helpful thing, but that's what a lot of people had believed at the time. There were many different tools that were used. A lot of them looked like they came from dentistry school, but a lot of these tools were a bit outdated in our times, but people used them and would do treatments such as using leeches, or they could use cupping and other sort of odd techniques. Now, for this next activity, we're going to share our scars. Scars are a part of our lives. If you still have if you have a sheet of paper nearby or a note card of sorts, break up into groups of two if you have groups, and write down your scars. Anything that has shaped you as a person, from accidents or incidents that happened to you. When we come back, I will ask you a few questions about your scars and wounds. So, now that you've shared your scars and wounds with one another, I have a couple of questions for you. How did it feel to share your scars or wounds with one another? What do your scars have to say about you? Have they helped or hurt you as a person? And do they help you be more vulnerable or relatable to others? While a lot of well-known myths and mythology about the different types of scars and wounds were out there, there were some great medical advancements. There was a guy named Hippocrates. He's known as the father of medicine. A lot of his thoughts are still in use today. He wrote a book called On the Sacred Disease. This debunked the myth that disabilities, including epilepsy, were caused by a curse from the gods or goddesses. He decided that we needed to have a more medical, humane treatment of those who had hidden disabilities. Now we're moving forward to the medieval Renaissance period. While advances were made in the community, a number of myths and treatments were still controversially held. Individuals with disabilities disregarded as human beings. A number of those who were considered interesting or amusing served as court jesters or fools in royal courts. They were seen as unfit to live, thrown into the woods, and bound hand and foot. This is where feral children comes into play. They were not worth adopting or using for trade, kept indoors or locked away, and you could have bloodletting as the most common use for those who have a disability. I'll have posted some pictures for you on my Facebook page of like the temples, and a picture of Hippocrates. And I'll be sharing another story with you from my friend Formerly Bodies, and sharing about how her music is shaped by her struggles with depression, body image, and other relevant topics to daily life. For your next assignment, you're going to be talking about films that have with characters who have disabilities, with characters who have scars and wounds. A couple of these movies include On the Way to School, Murder Ball, Roy O'Shea Was Here, aka Inside Advancing, The Best Years of Our Lives, and My Left Foot, to name a few. It's important to ask yourself these questions. Does the film positively or negatively portray a disability? How does it affect understanding a disability, and what stereotypes or myths pervade in the film? You can check your list that I've sent you from Facebook or by email. And if you think there's another film you would like to view, then go ahead and view that film. This is most of what happened during the second part with Scars and Wounds, second part of our historical look. Now we're moving away from the more religious aspect, where people thought, oh, disabilities were caused by angry curses. There was a lot of separation and banning. And now we're moving towards a medicinal treatment. Of course, there were still things out there like the start of the freak show. A couple of people could make money, but oftentimes they were abused and could be neglected on these freak shows. But we're going to be making some progress. There's a guy, we'll soon see a professor named Pinot, who will affect how we think about mental illnesses at the time, and at the time period, which is the Industrial Age, and towards the future. Early Industrial Age, from the Early Industrial Age on into the modern times. We will take a look at him in part 3 of our disability of the belonging place, where we're going to talk about the barriers that prevent communication, and we'll be looking at the monsters in society, those mythical mongrels of eugenics and institutions. I hope you will join me for part 3, and I hope you have some good discussion amongst yourselves about the scars and wounds. So, what scars and wounds do you still have? Do you need to forgive somebody? How about yourself? And please don't be afraid to share about your scars and wounds. If you need to share scars and wounds with me through Facebook or by email, I'm willing to listen and talk to you. And I hope you're willing to share your scars and wounds, because it's part of the journey towards creating the belonging place. Until next time, I'll see you at part 3.